have this type of project for our children. Local authorities are already setting out their plans for this Christmas, and let's make sure that we get to even more kids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past decade, there's been a 47% decrease in drama and a 36% drop in music participation in schools. A broad curriculum is vital to young people's life chances, yet access often depends on parents' ability to pay for these activities. I heard what the Minister had to say about the music curriculum, but unless the government commits to providing the resources to all schools to provide creative arts education, young people will be let down. What will the Minister do about it? Will he provide that funding?
Minister.
We are committed to arts education. The proportion taking at least one GCSE in an arts subject has remained broadly stable over the last 10 years. And also we're committed to very significant sums of funding for arts and music projects, £620 million over the last 3 years, including £79 million for the 119 music education hubs, £148 million for the music and dance scheme. We are very committed to the arts and to drama in our schools.
Bill Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State kindly speak with the Secretary of State for the Home Department about getting visas for the 12 at-risk Afghan scholars, some still in hiding, some in Pakistan, who have been awarded sponsored places by high-quality British universities and need the visas to take them up?
I will most certainly undertake to do that, and I think we've seen the education community in the United Kingdom coming together in order to support those who want to resettle from Afghanistan here in this country, but I will certainly undertake that. And we also want to look at the opportunities for those brilliant, amazing people from Afghanistan and other opportunities that they can play in our part in the education system here in the UK.
We now come to the statement on Afghanistan from the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will update the House on the situation in Afghanistan and our enduring effort to provide sanctuary for those to whom we owe so much. Since the House last met, our armed forces, diplomats and civil servants have completed the biggest and fastest emergency evacuation in recent history, overcoming every possible challenge in the most harrowing conditions and bringing 15,000 people to safety in the UK, and helping 36 other countries airlift their own nationals. They faced the pressure of a remorseless deadline and witnessed a contemptible terrorist attack at the very gates of the airport, with 2 British nationals and 13 of our American allies among the dead. But they kept going, and in the space of a fortnight, they evacuated our own nationals alongside Afghan friends of this country who guided, translated and served with our soldiers and officials, proving their courage and loyalty beyond doubt, sometimes in the heat of battle. The whole House will join me in commending the courage and ingenuity of everyone involved in the Kabul airlift, one of the most spectacular operations in our country's post-war military history. This feat exemplified the spirit of all the 150,000 British servicemen and women who deployed in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, of whom 457 laid down their lives and many others suffered trauma and injury. Thanks to their efforts, no terrorist attack against this country or any of our Western allies has been launched from Afghanistan for 20 years. They fulfilled the first duty of the British Armed Forces to keep our people safe, and they and their families should take pride in everything they did. Just as they kept us safe, so we shall do right by our veterans. In addition to the extra £3 million we've invested in mental health support through NHS Op Courage, we're providing another £5 million to assist military charities who do such magnificent work, with the aim of ensuring that no veteran's request for help will go unanswered. And now the evacuation of Pitting will give way to Operation Warm Welcome, with an equal effort to help our Afghan friends begin their new lives here in the United Kingdom, and recognising the strength of feeling across the House about the plight of individual Afghans. Years before this episode, we began to fulfil our obligation to those Afghans who had helped us, bringing 1,400 to the UK. Then, in April this year, we expanded our efforts by opening the Afghan relocations and assistance policy. And even before the onset of Operation Pitting, we'd brought around 2,000 to the UK between June and August, and our obligation lives on. So let me say to anyone to whom we've made commitments and who is currently in Afghanistan, we are working urgently with our friends in the region to secure safe passage, and as soon as routes are available, we will do everything possible to help you to reach safety. Over and above this effort, the UK is formally launching a separate resettlement programme, providing a safe and legal route for up to 20,000 Afghans in the region over the coming years, with 5,000 in the first year. We are upholding Britain's finest tradition of welcoming those in need. And I emphasise that under this scheme we will of course work with the UN and aid agencies to identify those we should help, as we have done in respect of those who fled the war in Syria. But we will also include Afghans who have contributed to civil society or who face a particular risk from the Taliban, for example, because of their role in standing up for democracy and human rights, or because of their gender or sexuality or religion. All who come to our country through this safe and legal route will receive not a 5-year visa, but indefinite leave to remain. And our support will include free English courses for adults and 300 university scholarships. We will shortly be writing to local authorities and the devolved administrations with details on funding for extra school places and long-term accommodation across the UK. I'm grateful for everything they are doing, and of course for the work of my honourable friend, the Minister for Afghan Resettlement. I'm delighted but not surprised that across our country people have been fundraising for our Afghan friends, and we have received numerous offers of help from charities and ordinary families alike. And anyone who wishes to join that effort can do so through gov.uk. Mr. Speaker, our first duty is to the security of the United Kingdom. And if the new regime in Kabul wants international recognition and access to the billions of dollars currently frozen in overseas accounts, then we and our friends will hold them to their agreement to prevent Afghanistan from ever again becoming an incubator for terrorism, and we shall insist on safe passage for anyone who wishes to leave and respect for the rights of women and girls. Our aim is to rally the strongest international consensus behind these principles, so that as far as possible the world speaks to the Taliban with one voice. To that end, I called an emergency meeting of the G7 leaders, which made these aims the basis of our common approach. And the UK helped to secure a UN resolution passed by the Security Council last week, making the same demands. Later this month at the UN General Assembly in New York, I'll work with the UN Secretary General Guterres and other leaders to widen that consensus still further. We will judge the Taliban by their actions, not their words, and use every economic, political and diplomatic lever to protect our own countries from harm and to help the Afghan people. We've already doubled the UK's humanitarian and development assistance to £286 million this year, including to help people in the region. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday we shall mark the 20th anniversary of the reason why we went into Afghanistan in the first place, the terrorist attacks on the United States, which claimed 2,977 lives, including those of 67 Britons. And if anyone is tempted to say that we have achieved nothing in that country, or still tempted to say, Mr. Speaker, that we have achieved nothing in that country in 20 years, tell them that our armed forces and those of our allies enabled 3.6 million girls to go to school. Tell them that this country and the Western world were protected from al-Qaeda in Afghanistan throughout that period. And tell them, Mr. Speaker, that we have just mounted the biggest humanitarian airlift in recent history. 8 times, the RAF rescued more than 400 people on board a single plane, the most that had ever travelled on an RAF aircraft in its 103-year history. Helping thousands of people in fear for their lives, helping thousands to whom this country owes so much, and thereby revealing the fundamental values of the United Kingdom. There are very few countries that have the military capability to do what we have just done, and fewer still that would have felt the moral imperative to act in the same way. We can be proud of our armed forces and everything they have achieved, and for the legacy they leave behind, and what they did was in the best traditions of this country, and I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. The heroes on the ground of Operation Pitting are the best of us. The Ambassador stayed to process every case that he could. Paratroopers lifted people from the crush. Afghan soldiers continued to serve alongside us to the end. And thousands of others risked their lives to help others escape. They faced deadly violence and deliberately engineered chaos with courage, with calm and with determination. Thanks to their remarkable efforts, thousands were evacuated, British nationals have returned safely to their families, and Afghan friends are starting a new life here in Britain. Speaking directly to those who served in Operation Pitting, I say thank you. Your service deserves recognition and honour, and I hope that the Prime Minister will accept Labour's proposal to scrap the 30-day continuous service rule so that medals are awarded for your bravery. The entire Army, our armed forces and veterans deserve proper support for mental health. The new funding announced today is welcome, but it's unlikely to be enough. Previous funding was described, Mr. Speaker, as scandalous by the Select Committee, and the Office for Veterans Affairs is still being cut. All those involved deserved political leadership equal to their service, but they were let down. They were let down on strategy. The Prime Minister underestimated the strength of the Taliban. Despite intelligence warnings that rapid Taliban advances could lead to the collapse of the Afghan security forces, a return to power of the Taliban and our embassy shutting down amid reduced security, the government continued to act on the assumption that there was no path to military victory for the Taliban. Complacent and wrong. They were let down, Mr. Speaker, by lack of planning. 18 months passed between the Doha Agreement and the fall of Kabul. Yet, as the Prime Minister now concedes, only 2,000 of the 8,000 people eligible for the Arab scheme had been brought to Britain. 2,000 of 8,000. A strategic review was published to much fanfare, but it didn't mention the Taliban, NATO withdrawal or the Doha Agreement. And the Prime Minister only convened a G7 meeting on Afghanistan after Kabul was lost. Because of this lack of leadership, the government has left many behind to whom we owe so much. MPs in the last few weeks have had thousands of desperate calls from people trying to get to safety. Many remain in danger, including the Afghan guards who protected the British Embassy. In my constituency, and I'm not alone, members across the House will have had this, Afghans who applied for the Arab scheme weeks ago, sometimes months ago, who were clearly eligible, but weren't processed quickly enough by this government, didn't make it to the planes. And the stress levels of them and their families and all of our teams and caseworkers has been palpable in the last few weeks and months. A familiar and desperate story to many across this House, on both sides. The government doesn't even know how many UK nationals and how many Afghans eligible under the Arab scheme have been left behind to the cruelty of the Taliban. A national disgrace. Even if they could identify who they'd left behind, the government doesn't have a plan to get everybody out. Kabul airport remains closed to international flights. Safe passage has not been created to Afghans' neighbours. And whatever the Prime Minister says today, there is no international agreement on the resettlement of Afghan refugees. We have a Prime Minister incapable of international leadership just when we needed it most. I know it's uncomfortable. The terrible attacks from ISIS-K highlight the new security threat. The government must act quickly to coordinate international partners to ensure the Afghan government's collapse does not lead to a vacuum for terrorists to fill. And there's a desperate need for humanitarian support. The return to 2019 levels of aid spending is necessary, and where's the plan to ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands? Mr. Speaker, to those that have managed to escape Afghanistan and have arrived here in the UK, we say welcome. I know you will give as much to this country as you make it your new home. All you need is help and support. And I'm pleased that indefinite leave to remain will now be granted to all those who arrive by safe and legal routes. Local authorities across the country are trying to play their part, but they've been in the dark as to how many people they'll be asked to support and what resources they will have to do so. So we will look at the details. We will look at the details of the letter the Prime Minister referred to and examine the details. History will tell the tale of Operation Pitting as one of immense bravery. We are proud of all those who contributed. Their story made even more remarkable by the fact that whilst they were saving lives, our political leadership was missing in action. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there weren't many questions that the Right Honourable Gentleman put to me. In that, he made the general assertion that the government hadn't been focusing on Afghanistan, but as far as I can remember, he didn't even bother to turn up to the first of the 3 statements I've given on Afghanistan in this House, Mr. Speaker, this year. I don't know where he was. Such were his instincts and such were his understanding of the importance of that issue. I can tell him, Mr. Speaker, that actually his figures are quite wrong. That before April we'd helped 1,400 people to safety from Afghanistan under the Arab scheme since April. In April and August the 14th, we helped a further 2,000. And then, as he knows very well, Mr. Speaker, between August the 14th and August the 28th, this country performed an absolutely astonishing feat yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do everything we can to help those who wish to have a safe passage out of Afghanistan. And that is why we will continue with our international friends and partners to apply whatever pressure we can, economic, diplomatic, on the Taliban to ensure that they comply with that, Mr. Speaker, as they have said that they will. But, Mr. Speaker, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman should, in all candour, acknowledge the immensity of the achievement of the armed forces of this country in planning and preparing for months for Operation Pitting, Mr. Speaker, and then, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what he has just said, extracting almost double the number that they are originally preparing to do. It is a quite astonishing feat. It is a quite astonishing military and logistic feat. And one thing I welcome, Mr. Speaker, is his congratulations to the armed forces for what they did.
Tobias Elwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans and families, indeed the wider public, are asking what was it all for? The country is back in the hands of a dictatorship, terrorism is once again allowed to thrive, and the people of Afghanistan now face humanitarian disaster. More worryingly, the limits of the UK and Western influence have been exposed, and with America now adopting a more isolationist foreign policy, we have passed the high watermark of Western liberalism that began after the Second World War. This is a dangerous geopolitical turning point. I ask the Prime Minister, would he agree there is now a void of leadership in the West and NATO? And if Britain wants to fill that void, as we should do, it will require a complete overhaul of Whitehall to upgrade our strategic thinking, our foreign policy output, and our ability to lead.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend deserves to be listened with great respect on Afghanistan and for his service. He understands these issues deeply, but I must tell him that I think people listening to this debate across the country could be forgiven for not recognising that this country actually ceased military operations in Afghanistan in 2014. And what we are doing now is making sure that we work with our friends and partners around the world to prevent Afghanistan from relapsing into a breeding ground for terror, to make sure that we use all the levers that we can to ensure that the rights of women and girls are respected, and that everybody who wants safe passage out of Afghanistan is allowed to do that. That is what we're going to do, and we will continue to show the leadership that we have in the G7, in the P5, in NATO, and all the other forums in which this country leads the West.
Ian Blackford, the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank all those that assisted in the evacuation from Afghanistan over the last few weeks, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. Mr. Speaker, normally we have a Cabinet Minister sent to the House to cover for the Prime Minister, but today we have before us the Prime Minister desperately trying to cover for a Foreign Secretary who should have been sacked weeks ago. During committee last week, the Foreign Secretary failed to answer even basic questions from my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow South. I genuinely hope that the Prime Minister is better prepared today. Mr. Speaker, there is barely an MP in this House who hasn't submitted urgent and sensitive information to the Foreign Office on UK and Afghan nationals desperate to find safe passage away from the Taliban. It is a disgrace that most of these urgent queries have been left unresolved and unanswered. A disgrace not for us, but for all those who have been left behind, UK and Afghan nationals who are now fearful and in many cases in hiding. Thousands of desperate people we have a debt of responsibility to, have been left with no clarity, no answers and no help. So let me ask the Prime Minister, what assessment has been made of the number of UK nationals left in Afghanistan, and what plans are there to assist them? How many Afghans that qualify under the Arab scheme as interpreters or in other groups who have been left behind? And will the Prime Minister apologise to those who have been left behind, left high and dry, those that the UK has a responsibility to? Last night, in correspondence from Lord Ahmed, the government gave the excuse that delays in evacuating all those with rights were because the Foreign Office had received more correspondence than during COVID. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a fundamental difference. No one knew COVID was coming. The government had 18 months to prepare an exit strategy in Afghanistan. So can the Prime Minister give a firm deadline when the massive backlog of applications will be processed, and provide a new target date for when safe passage will be offered to those UK and Afghan citizens? When Parliament was recalled, the Prime Minister publicly agreed to hold a four-nation summit on the UK's responsibility to welcome refugees here. Can I ask the Prime Minister to give us the date when that summit will take place? And finally, with all the talk of cabinet reshuffle, can the Prime Minister guarantee that the Foreign Secretary will finally be sacked in any reshuffle? Or does he intend to reward incompetence?
Always, Mr. Speaker, happy to meet representatives of the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations, of course, Mr. Speaker. But he asked some specific questions about the handling of requests from those still in Afghanistan. And those who've been interceding on their behalf. I can tell him that by close of play today, every single one of the emails from colleagues around this House will be answered. And thousands and thousands have already been done. And as for the question, Mr. Speaker, of how many Arab candidates are remaining, I can tell him that the total number is 311, of which 192 responded to the calls that were put out. And I repeat, Mr. Speaker, we will do absolutely everything we can to ensure that those people get the safe passage that they deserve, using the levers that I have described. But nothing, but the contrast, Mr. Speaker, should be readily apparent to everybody in this country, with the huge number, 15,000 people, that we were able to help just in the course of those few days in August. And I think people will understand that it was a very considerable effort by our armed forces.
Just to help the House, we'll be running this to around 4:45. Not everybody's going to get in. People will be disappointed, but we're going to do our best. So let's help each other. Theresa May.
I join my right honourable friend in commending all those involved with the Afghanistan airlift, and also all those of our armed forces who served in Afghanistan, sadly 457 of whom, as we know, paid the ultimate sacrifice. We should all be proud of their achievements. Does my right honourable friend agree that as a result of NATO forces withdrawing from Afghanistan, the terrorist threat has increased? And will he confirm that all those involved in counter-terrorism work here in the UK will be given the necessary support to ensure they can keep us safe?
Thank my right honourable friend, and I know how much work she has done in her career to protect this country and to assist in counter-terrorism. Mr. Speaker, I can give her note that we have no direct information as yet of any increase to the threat, Mr. Speaker, but I can assure her and the House that every effort will be made to make sure that our counter-terrorist agents have the resources they need to keep us safe.
Debbie.
Mr. Speaker, I've received hundreds of emails from constituents about Afghanistan, and I have British nationals in Afghanistan, a husband and his pregnant wife. Can the Prime Minister say what discussions the government has had with Afghanistan neighbours about keeping borders open for those at risk under the Taliban and to support refugees?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that many colleagues around the House will be asking similar questions. I can tell her that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has been talking to the government in Pakistan and other regional countries about what we can do to assist them, as I've described. And as she knows, we have, in addition to the ARAP programme, we have the Afghan settlement programme running up to 20,000 over the next few years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all pay tribute to the Prime Minister for his increased funding towards mental health care for veterans, and I'm sure he's going to keep that sum under review should it need to rise. May I ask him, however, if he'll draw the lesson that he's already learnt from the appointment of our right honourable friend, the member for Louth and Horncastle, in having a single point of contact in the UK, and seek to have a single point of contact for those in Afghanistan who may need to access either the route of exit or support from Her Majesty's government?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman. He knows whereof he speaks, and I've met people who've come from Afghanistan only recently who have helped us greatly in the last 20 years, and the key issues for them, as the House will understand, are where are they going to send their children to school, can they get access to the housing they need. I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, for what he is doing, and he is quite right, Mr. Speaker, that my honourable friend, the member for Louth and Horncastle, is the single point of contact that they should focus upon.
David.
Mr. Speaker, we all saw the horrific carnage outside Kabul airport. Over 180 people killed. So I join the Prime Minister in remembering all those victims, not least the 2 British nationals and the child of a British national. That airport atrocity was the work of the terrorist organisation ISIS-K. Everyone agrees we must now work to stop ISIS-K becoming a threat to the British people. Yet under this Prime Minister's watch, not only has he failed to agree an international coordinated strategy to take on ISIS-K, he has even failed to prescribe ISIS-K as a terrorist organisation unlike other Five Eye countries. Will the Prime Minister explain these failures on national security?
I'm afraid the right honourable gentleman is in error. ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan province, is a subset of Daesh. It's part of Daesh, and as he knows very well, one of the bitter ironies of the situation is, of course, that the Taliban themselves are no friends to ISIS-K, and whatever government there is in Kabul will need help fighting them.
Jacob Young.
Speaker, we are proving our immense generosity by supporting those in dire need in Afghanistan with safe passage to the UK. But our ability to do so is strained by the continuing uncontrolled illegal migration on the English Channel. What more can the government do to prevent it?
My honourable friend is completely right, and of course the issue is that very sadly, I think our friends across the Channel in France are faced with a very difficult problem of large numbers of people who want to come to this country, and we are doing everything that we can to encourage the French to do the necessary and impede their passage. But I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is working round the clock to ensure that we not only encourage the French to stiffen their sinews and stop people making the journey, but we use every possible tactic that is available to us as well.
John MacDonald.
Could I ask the Prime Minister, raise a constituency matter with the Prime Minister? I've had over 800 Afghani local families contact me about their concerns about their relatives in Afghanistan, and we now have the thousands that are coming to this country, largely coming through Heathrow, and being quarantined in about 7 hotels in my constituency. There's a real anxiety that on past performance of what's happened with asylum seekers in hotels in our constituency, they could be trapped in those hotels for quite a long time to come. What I'd like the Minister to arrange is for a meeting with myself and the relevant Minister or officials to discuss the plan for the support for those families, because I welcome, like everybody else, and my community does too, the support for those families, but also the long-term relocation plan to make sure that they have all that they can to settle here for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the right honourable gentleman is right to draw attention to the issue. Some councils have responded magnificently, notably in the East Midlands and elsewhere. I know that my right honourable friend is putting, for CLG, is putting substantial funding in place, Mr. Speaker, but if he wants a further meeting, I have no doubt that the relevant minister will be only too happy to oblige.
Siobhan Bell.
Mr. Speaker, I am working with incredible Stroud constituents who are dedicating their time to helping Afghan families under threat. These people are in hiding. The Taliban have been going door to door looking for them. Border options are dangerous and constantly changing. They are absolutely terrified. Prime Minister, will you ensure and help me to show these families that they should not lose hope, and help us as MPs provide timely and credible information about safe passage options?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and my honourable friend is entirely right in what she says, but that is why we're going to continue to put all the pressure that we can on the Taliban to ensure safe passage for the groups that I have described, and we're joined in that by friends and partners around the world.
I join with the tribute to our armed forces who have worked so hard. There are still people being persecuted and hunted by the Taliban because they worked for the UK government, but through contractors, not as direct employees. And they haven't had replies to their ARAP applications, and the rumour circulating is that they may have to wait for the resettlement scheme, but also that the places on the resettlement scheme many of them have already been allocated and that the scheme is almost full. Could he clarify the situation for those people? Also tell us whether some of the resettlement scheme places have been pre-allocated, and if so, how many? And say what will be done for those contractors as well as direct employees who we owe an obligation to.
No, I'm very grateful to the right honourable lady, and she raises an important question. I can tell her that the ARAP places, as it were, have not been transferred. They continue to be valid. People on ARAP scheme continue to be eligible, and nor is it correct, Mr. Speaker, to say that the initial budget of 5,000 for the resettlement scheme has already been filled. That is not correct either.
Dr. Julian.
Mr. Speaker. The Council for At-Risk Academics has been rescuing scholars in danger from oppressive regimes since the Nazi period in 1933. The Home Office has been sent a list of 12 such scholars, some of whom are in hiding in Afghanistan, some in hiding in Pakistan for lack of documentation. Will the Home Office make their case a priority because in them lies any hope for the future of Afghanistan?
Yes, well, there are many difficult cases, Mr. Speaker, but my right honourable friend is very... I thank him for drawing attention to these particular individuals who are at risk, and I'll ensure that the relevant Foreign Office Minister is in touch with him about the specific cases that he raises.
Rachel Bassett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and the region is growing by the hour. The famine is expected, and of course aid is going to be difficult to get through. So what specific steps has he taken already to ensure that that famine is averted, but also the region receive the international development aid it requires in order to avert a further crisis?
Right. I talked immediately, Mr. Speaker. I talked immediately that the crisis broke to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres about what the UN should be doing, what the UK was going to do to support. And as she knows, the UN continues to be in country in Afghanistan, and we've doubled our humanitarian support, and we'll be working with friends and partners at UNGA and beyond to ensure that we tackle the humanitarian crisis as well.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly the last months has seen the shattering of many illusions, but does my right honourable friend agree that if we are tonight to help the people of Afghanistan, millions of whom are out in the open and will not be fed, we need to make sure that the whole international community focuses on doing so through the mechanism of the United Nations and probably through the traditional mechanism of a regional contact group, and that Britain, through its experience on these matters, through its membership of the UN Security Council, through its G7 chairmanship, is now in a pivotal position to help those people I mentioned.
My right honourable friend is it completely right to raise the contact group in addition to the other forums that I have described, and to pay particular note to the role of the UN. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has just talked to Jean Arnaud, the UN Secretary General's special representative to Afghanistan. I think that the contact group is a vital part of the way we should coordinate our efforts.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, 80% of the world's heroin and opium supply originates in Afghanistan, providing the Taliban with more than half its income and causing untold misery across the world. For the future, what steps is he taking in partnership with UK allies to prevent the Taliban and the organised criminal gangs they work with from flooding our communities with yet more heroin, given they are now in control in Afghanistan and have fewer impediments than ever to growing more opium?
Sadly, Mr. Speaker, the rate of production and export of heroin, of opium from Afghanistan has been increasing in recent years, and I think the figure is actually even higher now in terms of global output than the one that the Honourable Lady suggests. And what is needed is, of course, to insist that the Taliban stop this, that they don't allow Afghanistan to continue to be a narco state. But the way to fight heroin consumption in this country is to have a strong crime-fighting institution such as the National Crime Agency. I was privileged to see the work of our United Kingdom's crime fighters doing fantastic work near Glasgow.
Steve Double.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware that as a result of the NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan, there is great concern that the terrorist threat to this country has increased. So can he reassure the people of this country that we maintain not only the military capability but also the political will to take whatever action is necessary against groups like ISIS-K to keep this country safe?
My honourable friend makes an extremely important point, a question that I think a lot of people will have formed in their minds, and I know my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has answered this before, but of course we keep those options on the table, and of course the Taliban are aware of that.
Dave Meghill, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, there are many barriers facing people already in the immigration system coming through. One is that some of my constituents have spouses and children whose original documents are with the Home Office and they only have photocopies. And another, of course, is the English language test. Is he and the Home Secretary proposing any movement on those issues in order to support people, particularly those already in the system, to get here as quickly as possible?
Yes, I thank the right honourable lady, and she should know that, of course, we try to help people coming from Afghanistan in the most expeditious way possible. And I think, really, this country cannot be faulted for the generosity of our offer on the resettlement programme, and it certainly cannot be faulted, Mr. Speaker, for the sheer number of people we've moved already to this country.
Logan.
Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statements. Aside from the G7 and traditional partners that the Prime Minister referred to, in the months and years ahead in the region in Central Asia, along with Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and in particular with China, what role does he envisage these countries playing in the geopolitics of the region?
Mr. Speaker, my friend asked a very, very important question, but I think the answer to that question is it is in the interest of every single one of the countries he has just mentioned to ensure that Afghanistan does not relapse into being a breeding ground for terror. Mr. Speaker, it is not in China's interest, it is not in Uzbekistan's interest, it is not in Russia's interest. Russia has abundant experience, Mr. Speaker, of the risks of Afghanistan. And that's why it's so important that we work with friends and partners around the world, and indeed those who aren't ordinarily classified as our friends, to achieve a common perspective on the pressure we've got to apply to the Taliban.
Ellen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents have family members in Afghanistan who could be eligible for asylum in the UK under more than one route, for example via ARAP, or under the Foreign Office Special Cases criteria, or under family reunion. Yet there is currently no coordination between departments. My constituents are being passed from pillar to post. ARAP are refusing cases where there may be an alternative route, and the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary are not replying to their emails. When will the Prime Minister sort out this lack of coordination across his government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must reject that in the strongest possible terms, because I want to pay. Because the House has paid tribute, quite rightly, Mr. Speaker, to the work of the armed services over the last few weeks and months. But I think they should also pay tribute to the Foreign Common and Development Office rapid reaction team who went out to Afghanistan. They should pay tribute to the border force, officials who went out there and who worked hand in glove to help thousands of people come to this country in safety.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of protecting our country now that the risk from terrorists has undoubtedly increased, what is the Prime Minister's assessment, not just of the Taliban's willingness to deal with terrorists operating in Afghanistan, but actually their capability to deal with that terrorist threat, given what we saw from ISIS-K just a week or so ago?
My right honourable friend is right to draw attention to the risks that the Taliban are themselves running, because they now possess the government of Afghanistan, and it is their responsibility, and they clearly face that threat from ISK and indeed potentially other groups. And of course, they will do everything, I imagine, to protect the public. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, we have to face the reality that the Taliban have now got the problem. We will do everything we can, of course, to ensure that we guard against future outbreaks of terrorism from that country, but it is in the interest of the new government of Afghanistan to crack down on terrorism as much as anybody else.
Sybil Roberts.
Under the Nationality and Borders Bill, an Afghan woman who flees with her children and arrives in Britain by an irregular route won't be welcomed. She'll be criminalised. Wales has declared our role in the world to be as a nation of sanctuary. Will he withdraw the Borders Bill to enable us to fulfil our ambition and to make that warm welcome he spoke about?
No, I can't accept what the honourable lady has said, because this country has been extremely more generous than most countries around the world, not just in bringing people immediately from Afghanistan, but in setting out a safe and legal route for 20,000 more to come. And that is a big number, and the route for those people is clear.
Mr.
Speaker, I'm very pleased to hear about the Operation Warm Welcome, and Wiltshire, my county, is home to many thousands of British soldiers who have served with Afghan colleagues over the last 20 years. And I hope the Prime Minister will join me in congratulating Wiltshire Council and the communities of Wiltshire, including the military communities, for the welcome that they are offering to those refugees. And will he assure the House that councils across the country will get the resources they need to support those evacuees?
Yes, I thank him, and of course I congratulate Wiltshire Council for what they are doing, as I congratulate all councils who are stepping up to the plate and helping Afghans to settle and to integrate at this time. But what I can tell him is that Wiltshire Council and all other councils involved will get the support and funding they need.
Richard Bergen.
Like other members, my constituency office and I have been doing everything we can to help constituents trapped in Afghanistan and to help their relatives who need to get out urgently. But it's clear that the government is failing to do all it can to help these vulnerable people and is disgracefully putting even more people's lives at risk. More widely, President Biden has called for an end to an era of major military operations to remake other countries. Given the huge loss of life in the disastrous and tragic wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya and elsewhere, isn't it time that we do the same?
Mr. Speaker, as I've just reminded the House, the UK ended its military operation in Afghanistan in 2014.
Anthony Magnum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister what engagement he has had with NGOs, which are the only Western organisations that are still on the ground in Afghanistan, he and the Foreign Secretary have had, and what steps he will take to protect them? And can I also ask what parameters need to be met to see the embassy reopened? The British diplomatic network is one of the finest in the world. That is surely the way to be able to help those who have been left behind.
My honourable friend is entirely right to draw attention to the incredible work done by aid agencies, by NGOs, and it's precisely to support those fantastic agencies that we've doubled our humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, to the region, to £286 million this year.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Later today, I'll be reunited with an Afghan Special Forces commander that I had the privilege of serving alongside. He's mightily relieved to be here, but understandably deeply concerned about the hundreds of his men and their family members who, although approved for relocation to the UK, were left behind. What can I tell him is being done to ensure that those who are in limbo are afforded safe passage, protection and unimpeded access to the UK?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the service of the honourable gentleman opposite, and in addition to the service of the Afghan Special Forces, and he's absolutely right to draw attention to what they did. I believe the 333, the triples, were incredibly important, and we will do whatever we can, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, to ensure that those who have not yet come out do get the safe passage they need.
Johnny Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister just said from the dispatch box, no veterans' call for help will go unanswered, and I totally support that ambition. In fact, that was a central aim of the establishment of the Office of Veterans Affairs when he started. But he knows, and I know, that he has consistently failed to take the measures required to make that a reality for veterans in communities like mine. What is he going to do differently to make veterans feel like this change and not just read about it in the newspapers or hear about it from Westminster?
I thank my honourable friend for the work that he did as Minister for Veterans Affairs, and indeed for his service in Afghanistan, and I believe that he underestimates gravely underestimates what this country has done. And just today on veterans' mental health, Mr. Speaker, the House will have heard the further support that we're offering. But this is a government that is absolutely determined to support our veterans, and that's why we passed the Overseas Operations Bill and will continue to take steps to protect the veterans of this country.
Benedict Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have cases involving over 300 people who are still stranded in Afghanistan, and despite raising every case with the FCDO and the Home Office, I'm yet to receive a substantial response. Not one. My constituents are desperate for information on how to travel to third countries and when the full resettlement scheme will be launched. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss these urgent cases and promise that every email will receive a proper response from the relevant department?
I thank her. I expect that she speaks for many colleagues around the House who like me, who will have received messages from those who wish to leave Afghanistan. But I just repeat what I said earlier on, Mr. Speaker, that every single email from colleagues is being responded to by close of play today.
Peter Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like many members, I've had emails from Afghans in this country worried about their people back in Afghanistan. And the Home Office and the Foreign Office have managed to get some of those people relocated. But I had the extraordinary situation, sir, where I had an email, a very detailed email, about these Afghans who had been persecuted, who had worked for the British, and it was very detailed, and they produced all the documentation. Then the following day, my constituent wrote to me and said, "I'm really sorry. It's a complete lie. These people are Taliban, and I can't go through with this masquerade." I just wonder, sir, whether we should be on a guard against getting such people into this country.
My honourable friend will be relieved, I'm sure, like many people in this House, to know that from the very beginning of pitting and the Arab scheme and all the subsequent schemes that we've put in place, the very highest possible security checks have been instituted to make sure that people are who they say they are, and that we receive to this country the people who genuinely deserve to come here.
Stephen Furry.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister clarify the current situation that applies to those Afghans who were in this country and in our asylum system prior to the fall of Kabul? Will they too be given indefinite leave to remain? And surely there is no circumstances in which they would be forced to return to Afghanistan?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful you raised an important point, but many of these individuals will already be going through procedures in the courts, and we can't interrupt them, so those will go on.
David Davis.
The whole House agreed with the Prime Minister when he celebrated the heroism of our troops, but that simply served to crystallise that this was not so much a defeat as a capitulation, an abandonment by the West of both people and principle. Can I ask the Prime Minister whether he believes Tony Blair was right this morning when he said the Western leadership was naive to believe that countries could be remade, or was it that our remaking of Afghanistan needed to last longer?
Well, if Mr. Blair, Tony Blair, was saying that it was naive to believe that countries could be remade, Mr. Speaker, and he was thinking of some of the things that he supported, then I think he was spot on.
Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Prime Minister, he will know that after the calamitous collapse of the government in Kabul, the disorderly retreat by Western powers, that there was rejoicing in parts of Mozambique, across the Sahel, and of course in Somalia. Those are countries in which we have an interest, because if nothing else, they can be a source of terrorism here. What messages is he prepared now to give about the UK, but about the UK working with partners to guarantee that there is a proper response, a measured response, that will make sure that we are not at risk of terrorism?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is focusing on exactly the right question and on exactly the right response from the Western world and indeed the whole global community. We need to work together to ensure that as far as we possibly can, we condition the new government, new authorities in Kabul to understand that Afghanistan can't just slide back into being a cesspit of terror, and that's our effort today.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many lessons will have been learnt and relearnt from Afghanistan, not least the need for boots on the ground. With the US becoming more isolated, will my right honourable friend look again at the disastrous plan to reduce the army by 10,000?
Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of what we've done since this government came in to increase the size of our defence commitments to the biggest, by the biggest amount since the end of the Cold War. And on his point about Afghanistan, I think that the reality is that even when there were 130,000 Western troops in Afghanistan, it was not possible to subjugate the Taliban, and I'm afraid that we're living with the lessons of that today.
Line Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, through tears, a young Afghan constituent told me how his father, a British citizen, was turned away from the Baron Hotel in Kabul on the 28th of August. His father was trying to evacuate his other children, but he was refused permission to take two of them out of the country because they were aged 18 and 19. Can the Prime Minister imagine the pain of that kind of family separation? So all of them have stayed in Kabul at huge risk to themselves. Will he look again at the rules of family reunification and finally make it possible for families to stay together and not to have to face this terrible, terrible choice?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will be full of sympathy to the family that she describes and the heartbreak that they must have felt, and I'm sure there are many cases in Kabul right now. But I think that the record of this country in receiving people and being prepared to receive people in the future is very good. And can I ask that in case of the particular family that she's talking about, can I ask her please to write to me or to the Home Secretary directly?
Caroline Noakes.
Many constituents have understandably been in touch, desperately worried about family members in Afghanistan. They want to find out whether the Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme will be an application or an allocation process, when it will open, and what that process will look like.
Yes. I thank the Right Honourable Lady. We'll be making sure that there is a process by which people can apply, but there is clearly a ceiling in the first year of 5,000, then it goes up to 20,000 over the next few years.
John Chorley.
Speaker, Christians in Afghanistan are one of the many minorities facing persecution, and many have been forced to flee their homes. A church community in my constituency is working around the clock to support several Christian families to flee to Pakistan and to seek asylum at the embassy of a safe third country. They're not looking for asylum in the UK, but they're looking to get to Pakistan. So what particular support will his government offer vulnerable Christians, such as those that the community in my constituency are working with? And to which department should I direct my entreaties in the hope of actually getting an answer?
I thank the community, the church community that she describes for the work that they are doing, and in moving people to Pakistan, the government is helping by increasing the funding available, and much of which obviously already goes to Pakistan, and that's the purpose of the increase in the aid budget this year.
Liam Fox.
Even if we believe that the whole Afghanistan withdrawal was a US-made policy that was ill-judged and poorly executed, can I ask my right honourable friend to reject those voices calling for the United Kingdom to pull back from the United States and seek alternative alliances elsewhere? Surely the right response is to stick closely to our US friends, remind them that in an era of globalisation, our economic and security interests will be threatened beyond our borders, that the United States is a force for good in the world, and that greater isolationism can only put us all in greater danger.
Mr. Speaker, we helped 36 countries to repatriate their nationals or those that they had helped. But we could not have done it, Mr. Speaker, had it not been for the bravery of the US military and the commitment of the US military. And I passionately agree with what he has just said about the fundamental importance of our alliance with the United States of America.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government leaving vulnerable Afghans and British nationals behind is unforgivable. But what is completely and utterly reprehensible is that the families of two of my constituents, including a 7-month-old child, were forcibly removed from flights and thrown out of Kabul airport onto the streets where the scene of the horrific suicide bombing hours before. Mr. Speaker, I am absolutely furious, and I want to ask the Prime Minister, how on earth was this potentially fatal decision allowed to happen even after I raised these matters with ministers sat to his left and his right? And how many others were ejected from the airport into harm's way? And just what does he have to say to the families that the government has now put in grave danger?
I thank him very much, Mr. Speaker, for raising the case. I have to tell him that I'm told we have no evidence of anybody being pulled off flights, but I would ask him, obviously, Mr. Speaker, I would ask him to raise it with raise the particular cases directly with my right honourable friends beside me. But I can tell him I think that when he looks at the overall record of the UK in moving people out of Kabul and across the whole of Afghanistan, it was an astonishing feat.
Ian Duncan.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. Can I ask whether or not he's noticed that the Chinese government, since our departure from Afghanistan, has used Afghanistan to up its threats on Taiwan with hundreds of overflights, threatening them and telling them when the war comes, the US will not be there to support them. Could my right honourable friend take this opportunity from the dispatch box to say to the Taiwanese and others, we fully support their right to democracy, self-determination, and we will be there to support them no matter what the Chinese say, and could we persuade the Americans to do the same?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, and I'm of course aware of the continuing issues between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, and I've discussed that indeed recently with the President of the United States, and it's one of the reasons why it's absolutely vital that this country continues to insist on the primacy of our relationship with the United States, and the situation in Taiwan will continue to be difficult, and the House should understand. The only answer, the only way forward, is to continue to support American global leadership, and that is what we will do.
Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister knows, NGOs such as the excellent Kent Refugee Action Network provide vital support to those fleeing from conflict, and as he mentioned, that's via fundraising. But does he also acknowledge that the state has a duty of care regarding the mental health of traumatised refugees, including children? And if he does, how can he assure the House that this will be possible, given that the average wait for young people waiting just a basic mental health assessment is on average 2 to 3 years currently?
I thank her, but I can tell her that the government is absolutely determined to look after people coming from Afghanistan, and in particular look after their mental health or the trauma that they have suffered, and that's why we are investing massively in the services that are being provided not just by CLG but by local government across the board.
Sarah Dines.
Can I ask the Prime Minister, please, what extra funds are going to be made available for local councils and schools like the Derbyshire Dales District Council, who urgently want to help but want to make sure there are additional funds available?
I thank her, and I thank Derbyshire Dales District Council for stepping up, Mr. Speaker. And yes, of course, we will make sure that the funds are available, and she should make representations to my honourable friend, member for Louth and Horncastle.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister's handling of the planned departure from Afghanistan, for those of us who are old enough in here, is akin to one of the farcical characters in Carry On Up the Khyber. Foreign Secretary was on a beach as the Taliban advanced in Kabul. Unknown numbers of British nationals remain left behind, and the Taliban, and most probably ISIS, have been allowed to plunder military hardware and intelligence. Does the Prime Minister accept any responsibility, any personal responsibility, for the mess that's been left in Afghanistan, and does he agree that any notion of global Britain is in complete crisis?
No, Mr. Speaker, and he's wrong in every respect, including, by the way, Mr. Speaker, he's wrong in what he says about military hardware, because that was decommissioned.
Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said we should judge the Taliban by their actions, not their words. The Taliban in Afghanistan have said they will confine and operate within the rules of Islam. As somebody who comes from a Muslim background, whose father is an imam, whose grandfather is an imam, whose uncles were imams, I'm not an expert on Islam. I have a good understanding of the faith. A way forward for the Prime Minister and government may be this. If the Prime Minister were to use his kind offices and ask the OIC, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, 57 member states, to ask the Al-Azhar, leading Islamic school of thought, to set out what it means with regards to and what Islam stands for women and religious minorities. And that may give us a way to judge, to see what the Taliban are doing and what Islam stands for.
Prime Minister.
I think my honourable friend is making a very interesting suggestion, and I hope that it will be. I hope it, well, I encourage it to be taken up. But what we need to do is to make sure that those elements of the Taliban who are different, and I believe they are, who are different from the Taliban of 1996, are encouraged, and that we put the maximum pressure on them not to allow the more retrograde elements to have the upper hand. And that is what this government and other governments around the world are going to do.
Ben.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Many communities, the City of Leeds included, have always given a very warm welcome to refugees. But we know that the poorest parts of our country have consistently taken a much higher proportion of refugees and asylum seekers than the wealthier areas. Does the Prime Minister think that is fair? And if not, what does he intend to do about it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the whole country should pull together and everybody should step up to the plate. And I know that there are councils across the country that will want to help and are helping. I thank the people of Leeds very much for what they've done, both now and historically, and I hope that councils around the world will follow their example, around the UK will follow their example.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement, in which he refers to the fact that Saturday is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And given that public confidence has taken quite a bashing from this episode in the government's strategic thinking, is it not now time for a cold, hard, strategic look at how well we have done over the last 20 years, what has gone well, the mistakes we have made, what we have learned, and what should be implemented to implement those lessons? Will he undertake to make sure that reflection takes place?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I think the best I can do is direct him once again to the integrated review, which I know that he has studied and I believe is now more relevant than ever.
Jim Sham.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today. Is the Prime Minister aware that there is a desire within industry to help provide refugees with housing and jobs? Two firms in my constituency, for instance, Walbrook Foods and Match Direct, are very keen and willing to give the jobs to the Afghanis and are also have the access to private housing. Goodness always shines through, Prime Minister, and I think that's something we should always remember. What steps can the Prime Minister give via the Treasury to help assist and incentivise firms who want to help those who served alongside British forces and whose lives are at risk for their commitment to freedom and democracy in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes an incredibly important point, because the labour market is full of vacancies at the moment, and there are obviously opportunities for hard-working people of talent and energy to come and make their lives across the whole of the UK, and we will help them with training, with the English language, and, as I've been saying, with what else they need.
Marston.
In stark contrast with the Leader of the Opposition, whose definition of leadership seems to be silence followed by 2020 hindsight, I commend the Prime Minister for his leadership in this crisis, and I ask him to continue that, both on behalf of the UK and the G7, for women and girls in Afghanistan, both for their education and for their wider participation in Afghan society.
I thank my honourable friend, and I have to say, and I think that the UK, together with our German friends, our Italian friends, our French friends, our American friends, are pulling together with all our G7 colleagues and others, are pulling together to forge a collective global view as far as we possibly can about how to deal with the new regime in Kabul. And it's by working together that we will get the best results. And the UK, as the whole House knows, is in pole position in all the key institutions, and we will continue to exercise that role.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I realise the government's focus at the moment is on refugees and dealing with the immediate crisis. But does he not think that with tens of thousands of Afghan dead, thousands of American dead, hundreds of British dead, it is time for a full inquiry into the whole process that led us into Afghanistan and the whole notion of a foreign policy in which we intervene all over the world and start to re-examine our place and our role in this world?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman knows, because he's heard me say it before, that there was a full review after the extraction, after the end of the military operation in 2014, a review of what it achieved and the legacy of those brave British men and women who served in Afghanistan. I think that was the right thing to do. As for the rest, I don't know whether he's read the integrated review from cover to cover, Mr. Speaker, but I direct him to it.
Andrew Bridgen.
Following our ignominious withdrawal from Afghanistan, where effectively we were dragged out on the coattails of our more powerful American allies, the world has changed, Mr. Speaker, and the world has become a more dangerous place. Would my right honourable friend share with the House his latest assessment of the so-called special relationship? And isn't it time for another defence review?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and his trenchant views I often agree with, but I think in this case the special relationship is basically, Mr. Speaker, I think I called it at Carbis Bay the irreplaceable or the indestructible relationship. I can't remember exactly what phrase I used, but that is what it is. It is a basic geopolitical fact, and on the special relationship rests much of the security of the last 100 years, and it will continue to be of cardinal importance to this country, and that is a fact that is as understood in Washington as it is in this country.
Into Kyle.
The Prime Minister has turned his back on the EU. Washington has turned its back on him. Can he tell us, since he became Prime Minister and stood on a platform of global Britain, where does Britain have more influence than before he became Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
I'm delighted to say, Mr. Speaker, that thanks to virtually everywhere is the answer to that, Mr. Speaker. But across the because we are able. We not only have our own sanctions policy, Mr. Speaker. We've been able to set up embassies and legations, new ones around the world, in the South Pacific, in Africa, where we are opening up, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we are doing free trade deals. I think a total of 63 so far, Mr. Speaker. And who knows? Maybe there'll even be another one this week, Mr. Speaker.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister will be aware, that the majority of people who came to this country from Afghanistan came via Birmingham Airport to my constituency. Will my right honourable friend join me in commending the team at Birmingham Airport, Solihull Council, third sector organisations like Entrade at Three Trees Community Centre, who welcome nearly 1,000 people a day, and sometimes many, many children and young babies?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I had the opportunity to thank the troops the other day, but I want to thank everybody who's been involved, the Border Force officials, everybody in the councils who's been at the front line of dealing with this crisis. I think they've done it with exceptional humanity and compassion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've sent 143 Afghans who are connected with my constituency through
to the Foreign Secretary and to the Defence Secretary and the Home Secretary. I got them in the wrong order, but anyway, all three of them, because there are three different channels. Can I just urge the Prime Minister to reflect on the idea that has been suggested by countless colleagues on this side, that there should be a single triage point, a single person that deals with all of these, because since I sent in those names, one of them has been shot, one has been raped, and one has been tortured. So people are desperate to try and get the best result for these people. I'm sure the ministers want to help, but at the moment it just feels as if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House sympathises very much with what's happened to the individuals that he describes in Afghanistan, and we are doing our level best to help people as fast as we can. I want the government to focus on helping people with a single point of contact. That's why my honourable friend, the member for Louth and Horncastle, is the person in question.
Mr. Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The men and women who serve in our armed forces are remarkable and make huge sacrifices both personally and in their careers. Can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirm that they're going to get the very best of support and care when they return home, so that they know this nation is grateful for what they've done?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely vital that those who have given so much, who served so bravely in Afghanistan, and indeed their families, should receive the lifelong support that they deserve, and they will, Mr. Speaker.
Jessica Moore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My office and I have been trying for several years through the Home Office to reunite various Afghan interpreters who settled in Newport with their wives and families. And just hours before the withdrawal, their paperwork came through, but they weren't able to get through the crowds to flights. We understand they're not eligible for ARAP, so does that mean they are included in the resettlement scheme? And what happens now, given the principle of them joining their husbands has been agreed? Thank you.
I'm very grateful to I'm very sorry to hear what happened at Hamid Karzai International Airport. I hope that they will be successful under the resettlement scheme, and if she'd be kind enough to send details through to the Home Secretary, I'd be very grateful.
James Sullivan.
Mr. Speaker, it's very easy, of course, to apportion blame with the benefit of hindsight, but this is a really complex environment, and the current situation is as much a failure of leadership in Afghanistan as anything else. Whilst we may not want to engage with the Taliban, does the Prime Minister agree that we have no choice but to do so, and perhaps with a forward presence in Kabul in the same way that our Chinese and Russian adversaries have?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, my honourable friend is very wise in what he says. I believe that it is inevitable for us to engage with the Taliban, and indeed we have been. We are at the airport. British troops were working directly with their Taliban counterparts to ensure that the operation went through, and that was an inevitability, Mr. Speaker. And we will, of course, look at further cooperation, but as I said to the House, we will judge the new regime in Kabul not by what they say, but by what they do.
Mike McFadden.
Mr. Speaker, our troops did a great job at Kabul airport, but it's also the case that events of recent weeks have exposed the limitations of our ability to act out with the umbrella of the United States, even if we wanted to choose a different path. What is the Prime Minister's response to the exposure of those limitations?
Prime Minister.
I don't agree with what he said, because I think that the particular case of Afghanistan was one in which America was very much engaged because of 9/11. It was America that supplied 98% of the air power. The munitions dropped. 98% were from the US. It was overwhelmingly a US-led mission. But that doesn't mean that the UK cannot cooperate and will not cooperate with other friends and partners around the world. That is what we're going to continue to do.
James Ray.
167 occasions all told, I stood with people of what's now Royal Britain Bassett to see 345 of our comrades repatriated to this country. On no occasion did I hear anybody say why. Nobody ever said these lives were wasted. Nobody was ever ashamed of what had happened. On the contrary, they were proud of the fact that these young people had given their lives for the service of their country and for the benefit of the people of Afghanistan and for the security of the world. Will the Prime Minister not agree with me that that should now be the litmus test as to how we judge what's happening in Afghanistan? We should be proud of all we've done.
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. I believe he speaks for millions of people, quiet people, up and down this country.
Yes. Dan Abbott.
Prime Minister will be aware that the entire House is united in offering our respect and our congratulations to the people at the grassroots who made that evacuation of British passport holders and Afghans possible in recent weeks. But the Prime Minister must also be aware how difficult it has been to get responses from government departments on behalf of our constituents who are terrified about their relatives and want to arrange for safe passage for their relatives. Will the government give the House an undertaking that he will make sure that the relevant government departments have the resources, have the people, so we are able to communicate with our constituents and give them some news at least?
Prime Minister.
I thank her, and she's really repeating a point that's been made up and down across the House by many colleagues this afternoon. But I think that the work so far has been extraordinary. I pay tribute to the speed with which British officials have done their best to respond, and every email, as I said, Mr. Speaker, will be answered by tonight.
There's some didn't get in, and hopefully we can pick those up in the next statement from the Foreign Secretary. Call the Foreign Secretary.
Good luck, John.
Do you want me to wait? Go ahead. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will update the House on the UK's international response to the situation in Afghanistan. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has set out, over the last 3 weeks, through a shared effort right across government and our armed forces, we have delivered the largest and most complex evacuation in living memory. Between the 15th and the 29th of August, the UK evacuated over 15,000 people from Afghanistan. And that includes over 8,000 British nationals, close to 5,000 Afghans who loyally served the UK along with their dependents, and around 500 special cases of particularly vulnerable Afghans, including achieving scholars, journalists, human rights defenders, campaigners for women's rights, judges and many others. Of course, the work to get people out didn't start on the 15th of August. The SCDO advised British nationals to leave the country in April and then again on the 6th of August. We estimate that around 500 did so. At the same time, the government launched the ARAP scheme for interpreters and other Afghan staff, getting over 1,900 out before the airlift began on the 15th of August. Now, as the security situation deteriorated, we accelerated that process throughout July and early August. In total, since April, we've helped over 17,000 people leave. And I want to place on record my thanks and pay tribute to the Herculean efforts of our troops, our diplomats, our civil servants, who have done an incredible job in the toughest of conditions. And as we remember their efforts, we also remember those of UK armed forces who paid the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan, trying to make that country a better place for the Afghan people. Mr. Speaker, now that the evacuation has ended, we have moved into a new phase. We stand by our commitment to support those who have worked for us and to take all remaining eligible cases. Securing their safe passage out of the country is an immediate priority. We're working through our diplomatic channels to that end. And of course, the Taliban have given assurances that they will provide safe passage for foreign nationals and those eligible Afghans who wish to leave. So on the 30th of August, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2593, driven by the UK alongside the US and France, affirming the international community's expectation requirement that the Taliban should follow through on the assurances that they've given. Last week, I visited Qatar and Pakistan. In Qatar, I met with the Emir and their Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Sheikh Mohammed, to discuss safe passage alongside the international community's wider approach to dealing with the Taliban. We discussed ongoing efforts to re-establish flights at Kabul airport, where Qatari technical staff are working on the ground, and see how we can cooperate in handling the organisation of future flights. I also announced our new non-resident chargé d'affaires for Afghanistan, Martin Longdon, who is now working out of Doha. In Pakistan, I met with Prime Minister Khan and Foreign Minister Qureshi to discuss safe passage via third countries and the importance of holding the Taliban to its commitments. I also announced that we're sending £30 million of support to Afghanistan's neighbours. This will provide life-saving support for refugees, including shelters, household necessities, sanitation and other hygiene facilities. At the same time, I dispatched last week a new rapid deployment team to the region with an extra 22 staff in total. They will reinforce our embassy teams, our High Commission teams, in those neighbouring countries, processing British nationals or eligible Afghans who are seeking to leave via third countries, which we want to do just as fast as we possibly can, once they can leave, and subject to the necessary security checks. I also spoke to the Foreign Minister of Uzbekistan earlier today, the Foreign Minister of Tajikistan last week, and the Minister for South Asia, Lord Ahmed, last week visited Tajikistan and will return to the region shortly. Mr. Speaker, turning to the wider international strategy, the international community is adjusting, and it must adjust to the new reality in Afghanistan and recalibrate its approach. The UK is playing a leading role. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, convened G7 leaders on the 24th of August, to discuss a shared response to the situation. That followed a G7 Foreign Ministers meeting, and we are building a global coalition around 4 key priorities set out in a UK G7 paper that we've shared with those partners. First, we must prevent Afghanistan from ever becoming a safe haven or harbour for terrorists ever again. Second, we must prevent a humanitarian disaster and support refugees wherever possible in the region. The UK has allocated £286 million in aid for Afghanistan this year. We're supporting Afghanistan's neighbours, as I've already set out, and the Home Secretary has set out our resettlement scheme. So we are leading by example, which enables us to encourage others to step up in what will inevitably have to be an international team effort. Third, we must preserve regional stability, which risks being shattered by the combination of renewed terrorist threat and an exodus of refugees. Fourth, we must hold the Taliban and other factions to account for their conduct, including in particular on human rights and their treatment of women and girls. I'm taking this forward through our bilateral partners. We have a G7 Plus meeting later this week, and the UK is also pressing for further discussions amongst the permanent members of the UN Security Council. We plan to host an event at the UN General Assembly later this month, as indicated by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will not recognise the Taliban, but we will engage, and we will carefully calibrate our actions to the choices that they make and the actions that they take. Given our strategic priorities, the ones that I've set out, we must also set some credible tests to hold the Taliban to the undertakings they have made on safe passage, on terrorism, on humanitarian access, and a more inclusive government. And we stand ready to use all the levers at our disposal in that effort, political, economic and diplomatic. Mr. Speaker, we continue to galvanise the international community and bring together the widest possible group of influential countries to deliver on those strategic priorities and exercise the maximum moderating influence on the Taliban that we possibly can. And I commend the statement to the House.
Let's call Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy.
Mr. Speaker, this has been a painful and sobering few weeks, and were it not for the heroic efforts of the armed forces, as well as the brave diplomats and civil servants involved in Operation Pitting, many more lives would have been lost and many more left behind. They reminded us what courage looks like, and I would like to put on record my thanks to them, to all of those who've served in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, and to add my condolences to the families of all those killed in the horrific bombing at Kabul airport. But if more lives are not to be lost, we need some urgent clarity today. What specifically is the advice to people trying to leave? Should they stay put and be hunted by the Taliban, or should they make their way to a border and risk being turned back? Could the Foreign Secretary take care of some basic issues? The Home Office phone number provided to Afghans asks people to hold for hours, and it's still chargeable. This is pretty easy to fix. Could he have a word with the Home Secretary and get it dealt with? He wasn't able to tell us how many British nationals are still there, but I imagine he must know by now. So can he tell us? We know that only one security guard from the embassy got out, so what is his plan for the rest? I did a quick check before I left my office today. There are still hundreds of unanswered emails from MPs, and many of them have raised that with the Prime Minister today. How many staff are now working on this in the Foreign Office, and why hasn't it been dealt with? If they're to get an answer by this evening, can he assure us that that will be a real answer and not just a holding response? And can we have some clarity about who is actually eligible, particularly under the ARAP scheme? And it's welcome that the Defence Secretary has stayed for this statement. Without clarity about who is eligible, people can't risk heading to the border. So the special cases in particular, it would be really useful to have a much tighter idea of who they are. What is the assurance about safe passage that he believes he has from the Taliban? Does it apply to all those with documentation or just the British nationals? I understand that the technical problems at the airport have now been overcome, and that is welcome, but can he tell us a bit more about the diplomatic progress that has been made? How, for example, does he intend to square the circle to comply with the Taliban's refusal to allow a foreign military presence, but to safeguard those technicians from Turkey or Qatar or whichever other country is chosen to oversee that operation in order to make sure that they can be safeguarded? I very much support his view that it would be wrong to recognise the Taliban as a legitimate government, but this also presents a practical challenge to those countries that are considering stepping in to oversee the airport about how guarantees can be upheld. Can I just say to him that the coordination between the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence, despite some very hard-working civil servants on the ground who are working round the clock, is still appalling. My office is in touch with a small number of Afghan workers, for example, who were attached to intelligence and to MI6 in recent years. They're being treated as special cases under ARAP, and many of them have been waiting for months. I would like to place on record my thanks to the Secretary of State for Defence and also to the Minister for Afghanistan, who've made themselves available to many of us at all hours and short notice to assist with some of these cases. Their personal intervention has made a difference, but this is no substitute for a system. Could he also clear up some comments that he made at the Select Committee? He suggested that those who've been cleared to travel as part of Operation Pitting would now have to undergo security checks before they were accepted onto ARAP. Were those checks not initially done, or is he now reneging on his promise? I have to say that both of those scenarios concern us greatly. Mr. Speaker, these are practical issues that are within his gift, and the fact that they still haven't been dealt with sends a strong message that he's been more focused in recent days on keeping his job than actually doing it. I want him to prove us wrong, because a lot rides on this, including the lives of many Afghans who assisted us. Could I also ask him to say a bit more about how the UK is going to get aid into Afghanistan to those who need it? I've been in touch with aid workers on the ground, many of them female, who've been banned from working by the Taliban. Those aid agencies, of course, are understandably saying they won't operate with those conditions in place, but that means they're not operating at all. And on the refugee crisis, can I just say to him gently that countries in the region are not hugely impressed by the decision by the Home Secretary to cap the number of refugees that the UK will accept at 5,000. When they're dealing with a far greater refugee crisis, a bit of generosity from the UK would go a long way to helping to resolve the issues at the borders. Mr. Speaker, these are immediate concerns, but we are also concerned that for a generation of young Afghans, the future that they'd expected is unravelling in front of their eyes. Can he say something about the LGBT plus community and how their rights will be upheld as well as religious minorities? Can he outline the measures that he intends to take to set conditions for the Taliban regime, and particularly that the situation of women and girls will be the cornerstone of any future engagement? And finally, Mr. Speaker, can I just say that our intelligence has been downgraded, our diplomats and troops are now longer on the ground, and the Prime Minister appeared to say in the statement just now that the risk that is posed to the UK is unknown. He suggested in a media interview that we would rely on open source intelligence. Could he say some more about that? And also that we might be in a position where we were sharing intelligence with countries like China and Russia. Given the significant national security implications of this, the House has a right to understand what the government's strategy is on this, if there is one. This has been nothing short of a disaster, Mr. Speaker. So can I ask him now to turn with humility to the world and start to repair some of those broken relationships, those trashed alliances, those broken promises that have reduced us to a position where we're reliant on the Taliban for permission to safeguard our own citizens and negotiating with China and Russia in our own interests. In the cold, hard light of what has unfolded over this summer, surely it is time for him to rethink his approach to the way that Britain engages with the rest of the world.
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for what she said about the efforts of our UK forces, and I believe also the cross-Whitehall teams who've delivered the biggest evacuation in living memory. She asked for specific advice. She'll understand I'm a bit reticent about giving personal advice to generically, but the travel advice that the SCDO putting out is very clear, and it has been changed to reflect the situation on the ground, and I think that is the right point of reference for constituents of honourable members around the House. She asked about phone calls into the SCDO Crisis Centre. Since the 11th of August, it's handled more than 44,000 calls. We surged 45 members of SCDO staff and 35 staff from other departments. Since the 19th of August, we've answered well over 90%, 93% of the total number received. And every day since the 24th, our call handlers have answered more than 94% of the calls that were made. And just to give the Honourable Lady a sense, since the 20th of August, average wait times have been less than a minute. She also asked about correspondence. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, made clear, we will have sent a reply to all MPs' emails asking for an update by the 30th. Emails that we received by the 30th of August, we will reply to all of them today. That will be to enable to signpost them to the specific advice relevant to the particular case that they're raising. We will also respond to all the other emails that we've received by members of the public. She made some points, and a couple honourable members have made this point, certainly on her side, about putting them all in together. These are different cases. The eligibility for nationality is different from the resettlement scheme, which is different from ARAP. So it is right that they are triaged to the proper decision maker, and that's the point of the exercise that we're engaged in. In relation to ARAP, she asked about the details. The ARAP scheme is published, so the details are there. Well, if she's concerned about any particular aspects, then of course she should approach the relevant minister. She asked about safe passage and how well, we can't answer the questions, the Honourable Lady, in abstract, in order to give effect to the circumstances of the cases she's referring to. She asked about safe passage. The Taliban has given us an assurance that those nationals and those that work for us who want to leave will be allowed to leave. But like a range of other commitments that they've made, we'll have to hold them. These will form one of the early tests for the Taliban, and they will be judged by what they do rather than just what they say. But that was the reason that we passed, and she talks about influence. We led with the French and the Americans the UN Security Council resolution, which reiterated and affirmed and applied the international community's imprimatur on that demand of the Taliban. We'll now have to see whether they can pass that test. She mentioned Kabul Airport. Kabul Airport is not up and running yet, but there are efforts ongoing to deal with not only the operational capacity, the technical capacity, but also the security conditions. And I think for most cases, whether they're British nationals, Arab or special cases, indeed under the resettlement scheme, the most straightforward way will be if we can safely see Kabul Airport up and running. If not, we'll have to look at third country routes out. But of course, many of the third countries in the region are very nervous. We've had conversations with all of them. That was why I was in Qatar, Pakistan, to look at the arrangements, the practical arrangements for how we would deliver on it. She asked about security checks. Of course, we will make sure that in relation to those wanting to come to the UK, that not only do we check their eligibility so that the seats on planes are going to those who we want to come, who are eligible to come, who we need to come, and also to make sure the security checks are in place to avoid the wrong kind of people coming back to the UK. She also asked about aid into Afghanistan and how we can ensure it gets to where it needs to go. We've provided, and I announced last week, £30 million for neighbouring countries to deal with refugees in the region, precisely because it is better for refugees to be dealt with closer to their home, but also because we do recognise the burden that will be placed on the region. In relation to aid more generally and the rest of the 286 million, of course, this is another of the early tests for the Taliban, because we will not give aid to the Taliban, and therefore if they want to avoid the social and economic fabric of the country collapsing, if they want the aid to continue to flow, they will need to provide a safe operating environment for the UN and other agencies. And I spoke to the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy, Jean Arnaud, precisely about that. We've got further meetings this week with G7+. I will have further conversations. I'm sure I'll be travelling to the region. The UK has issued a G7 paper which sets out the key priorities from counter-terrorism to the humanitarian lifeline. It's been very well received. What we've now got to do, working with our partners, is operationalise it. She asked about some of the non-G7 partners. The reality is, if we want to influence in the most effective way possible the Taliban, we need a broader caucus, particularly regional countries, particularly those who also have a relationship with the Taliban, to exercise the maximum moderating influence on the Taliban. And that's just what we do.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm also grateful for advance sight of the statement, and I have to say on behalf of my group that the impression we've been given about ministerial communications with members of this House in constituency cases is not as rosy as has been put forward by government ministers, and I would constructively suggest that there needs to be a proper review of